NATO risks giving Ukraine a permanent seat. The US, UK and international allies are set to unveil new security measures for Ukraine at a NATO summit on Wednesday to protect the country from future attacks as Kyiv tries to come together. Comes just a day after President Vladimir Zelensky denounced NATO's refusal to give Ukraine an invitation or deadline to join the alliance as bad. Ukraine quickly forced it to join NATO in the face of the Russian invasion in February 2022 that killed thousands and millions of immigrants. Instead, he said the statement from the world's most economical G7 countries will show how allies will support Ukraine in ending the war in the coming years and protecting and responding to future aggression. Effectively, this would be a bilateral agreement with Kyiv for long-term military and financial assistance to sustain Ukraine's military and economy. The G7 includes the United States, Germany, Japan, France, Canada, Italy, and the United Kingdom. Zelensky said on Wednesday that the Vilnius summit was mostly positive and welcomes the new military service announced by the allies. Still, Zelensky asked for more, saying he would raise Ukraine's need for long-range weapons in his meeting with US President Joe Biden. We can say that the outcome of the meeting was good, but it would have been better if there was an invitation, Zelensky said. White House National Security Advisor Jack Sullivan said that Biden will discuss NATO's decision-making rationales. Joining NATO, he knows President Zelensky has good feelings and he's not afraid to share them. And he, President Biden, has been honest, fair and honest with President Zelensky, Sullivan told MSNBC. Acceptance requires trust. NATO, joint creation of a sustainable security environment, attacking one is attacking all. Be careful, don't make any military commitments to Ukraine, you're afraid it would be fun to do so. He approached all-out war with Russia. Ukraine is unsure about its weak security guarantees, because the Russian invasion trampled on the so-called Budapest Memorandum, in which world powers promised to guarantee the country's security in exchange for Kyiv's renunciation of Soviet-era nuclear weapons. NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg met with Zelensky and said that Ukraine is closer than ever to cooperation, ignoring Russia's recent warnings of the consequences of supporting Ukraine. Stoltenberg stated that Ukraine has the right to choose its own path and said, Moscow will not decide this. He said security measures against Ukraine must be smart to prevent future Russian attacks. Of course, information, the Security Council is important, but now the most important task is to ensure that the forces of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and his son are adequately armed. British Foreign Secretary Rishi Sunak said Ukraine's security plan would not replace all NATO members. More weapons. On Wednesday, Zelensky held bilateral talks with the United States, Canada, Germany, Britain, Japan and the Netherlands on the second day of the NATO summit in Vilnius to provide more weapons for the offensive. Tweeted, more weapons for our fighters, more safety of life for all of Ukraine. We will bring new important defense equipment to Ukraine. The first meeting of the new NATO-Ukraine Council, a new type of cooperation between Kyiv and the 31-nation alliance, will also be held on Wednesday. NATO was created in 1949 to protect the Allies from attack by the Soviet Union. A similar NATO-Russia summit was held in 2002 after some Western countries hoped to improve relations with Moscow after the end of the Cold War. After Russia annexed the Black Sea Crimean Peninsula from Kyiv in 2014 and supported NATO, NATO stopped cooperation. Proxies against government forces in eastern Ukraine. A full-scale Russian invasion in 2022 rekindled Cold War hostilities, bringing war to Europe's doorstep. NATO said it would not allow Ukraine to join the war with Russia, as Washington and Berlin warned NATO against any action that could bring it into conflict with Moscow. On the other hand, supporters of Ukraine's rapid accession to NATO in Eastern Europe and elsewhere were outraged by the disappointment. On the first day of the meeting, Russia was quick to oppose NATO's eastward expansion as a threat to its own security. Deputy Secretary General of Russia's powerful Security Council, chaired by President Vladimir Putin, Dmitry Medvedev, said that NATO's additional military aid to Ukraine has brought World War III closer. Security concerns from key countries and Ukraine's future dependence on NATO, fears that Ukraine will not be allowed to join the alliance together on Wednesday, are likely to constitute one of the most important NATO meetings in recent history. A shadow. U.S. President Joe Biden and the leaders of the G7 announced their strong support for Ukraine at the NATO meeting in Vilnius, Lithuania on Wednesday, and issued a statement supporting Ukraine to strengthen the military capacity of war-torn countries. While Biden acknowledged that the coalition did not invite Ukraine to the meeting because it made the necessary changes, he said, "We will not wait for this process to be completed to improve national security." Mr. Zelensky and I talked about the promises we can make meanwhile. So today, our long-term commitment is back to the assumption that this time he wanted it and that we would reassure him against anything. There will be aggression. Ukraine endured a meeting process as the U.S. president tried to unite the group in the face of Russian aggression, after President Vladimir Zelensky, who arrived in Lithuania on Tuesday, issued a coded message expressing his disappointment at not getting more specific details on when and how Ukraine will join the partnership. But he seemed to have heard enough, said at a meeting with the team leaders that the meeting went well and happily went home. Given Kyiv's relationship with NATO countries, one of NATO's moves is to agree to renounce the membership plan, a condition for Ukraine to join the organization. He did not give a timetable for when Ukrainians will become full members. "We can say that the outcome of the summit is good, but it would be better if we were invited," said Zelensky. Zelensky added that he is grateful to Biden and is confident that Ukraine will join NATO after the war. "I believe that NATO needs us as much as we need NATO, and I believe that is fair," he said. Biden said that Ukraine is not ready to join NATO, and in an exclusive interview with CNN last week, he said that Russia's war in Ukraine must end before NATO can make more decisions for NATO in Kyiv. An example of the tension between Washington and Kyiv entered the public preview of the meeting when National Security Advisor Jack Sullivan answered a Ukrainian activist's stern questions during the event. May gave a preview at NATO's public forum Wednesday morning. Here's how Biden will respond to Zelensky's concerns later in the day. Sullivan defended his decision to keep Ukraine out of the coalition for the time being, telling the official that the American people really deserve thanks for their support, while praising the Ukrainian people for standing up to Russia's aggression. "The Americans are watching and want to stand by the brave people of Ukraine, stand up and make it happen. I think the American people deserve to be thanked," we, the United States and our government, as friends and comrades, owe them a debt of gratitude for being willing to move forward like the rest of the world. Support Ukraine, he said. Help Ukraine build a defensive force on land, in the air and at sea, and call it a stable force in the region that can confront all threats first. Thanked the G7 leaders and Zelensky for their work, called for a strong expression of our commitment to Ukraine, and reiterated that the United States will be there for as long as necessary. Zelensky thanks the leaders for them. Renewed commitment. This opens up a whole new security opportunity for us, and I thank everyone who made this possible. Announced document showing the new military aid agreement numbered for Ukraine. To complete our long-standing support for Ukraine's defense of its national and territorial integrity, and to rebuild its economy through a bilateral security and planning agreement based on the multilateral system. In accordance with our laws and regulations, we begin negotiations with Ukraine, protect its citizens, and with the Euro-Atlantic community. Try to integrate itself, the statement said, adding that negotiations will begin immediately. We'll remain committed to our goal of realizing the long-term security commitments and plans of both parties. The primary objective is the maintenance of security services and modern military equipment, support for the development of Ukraine's economic base, military training, intelligence sharing and cooperation, and support for cyber defense, security and support. Second, to strengthen Ukraine's economic stability and strength, including through reconstruction and re-employment, and to build support for Ukraine's economic prosperity, including its security. This creates an urgent need for economic and financial support and influence. Ukraine will continue to implement the reform process that supports good governance needed to achieve Euro-Atlantic goals. Amanda Sloat, the Senior Director for European Affairs of the National Security Council, told reporters about the announcement that the bilateral negotiation process with Kyiv will begin. A strong and stable economy and aid to Ukraine must prioritize the reform process and promote the good governance necessary to realize Ukraine's Euro-Atlantic aspirations, she said. Sloat said that the purpose of the announcement was to strengthen Ukraine's defenses and send a message to Russia